The rejection did not come with a slam. It came with a smile, a polite, practiced curve of lips that meant nothing, paired with the kind of voice that never trembled because it never had to. Marcus Harlan, head of talent acquisition, closed the folder on the glass table, as if he were sealing a verdict in an envelope. "Daniel," he said, using the first name like a leash, "we appreciate you taking the time to come in." The conference room on the 15th floor of North Glass Tower was all light and angles, white walls, chrome trim, and a window that watched the city like an unblinking eye. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and new carpet, as if the room itself had been disinfected of anything human. Daniel Mercer sat with his hands folded in his lap, thumbs pressed together, still as a man waiting for the next sound to tell him whether to move or stay. His borrowed suit pulled a little at the shoulders. The jacket didn't fit right, but he had ironed it until the creases were sharp enough to cut. Across from him, 3 people wore confidence the way some men wore watches, expensive, unnecessary, and displayed on purpose. To Marcus's left, an HR coordinator named Paige watched Daniel with careful neutrality. To Marcus's right, the operations lead, Trent Wallace, held his pen like a gavel. None of them looked cruel. That was the part that made it worse. Cruelty could at least be named. Marcus slid the folder toward himself, tapped it once, and said, "Your background is unique." There it was, the word that pretended to be a compliment. Daniel met Marcus's eyes. He did not blink fast. He had learned not to. In other places, blinking too much made people think you were hiding something. In other places, a man's face could get him killed. "I'm not unique," Daniel said evenly. "I'm qualified." Trent's mouth tightened. Paige's gaze flicked, one quick glance, like a bird testing the air, toward Marcus. Marcus lifted his chin, softening his tone, as if Daniel were a child who had spoken out of turn. "We don't doubt your work ethic. Your performance reviews from security are solid, but this role is client-facing. It requires a certain polish." The word sat between them like a stain on clean glass. Daniel felt the muscle along his jaw twitch once. He kept his voice low. "I ran point on convoy routes outside Kandahar. I coordinated teams under fire. I managed people when the stakes were life or death. If you mean I can't greet a visitor and handle a schedule, that's not what we mean," Marcus interrupted smoothly, though it was exactly what he meant. Trent leaned forward a fraction. "This position is operations coordinator. It's a bridge between departments. Communication, perception, representing North Glass. We need someone who fits the culture." Culture. Daniel's stomach tightened at that word, because he had learned the language of rooms like this. He had learned how men in clean suits said dirty things without ever raising their voices. "You mean someone who looks like they already belong?" Daniel said. Paige's cheeks flushed. Trent looked away for half a second. Marcus's expression stayed calm, which told Daniel everything. The calm was not innocence. It was armor. Marcus opened the folder again, flipped to a page Daniel recognized. His resume, a single sheet of paper that held his life like a thin lie. "You don't have a degree," Marcus said. "It wasn't required in the posting." "It wasn't," Marcus admitted, and in that admission was the problem. The rules could be bent, just not for Daniel. "But we did say preferred." "What else is preferred?" Daniel asked quietly. "The right zip code? The right last name?" Marcus's smile returned. It was perfectly shaped and entirely empty. "Daniel, we're making a holistic decision." Holistic. Another soft word with sharp edges. Daniel could feel his pulse in his throat. Not fear, something older. A pressure behind the ribs that came from swallowing too many things for too many years. In the silence, he heard the faint hum of the building's ventilation system, steady as a machine's breathing. He thought of Ethan. Ethan Mercer was 9 years old and small for his age. All elbows and bright eyes, with a cautiousness that didn't belong in a child's body. He had asthma that could turn an ordinary night into an emergency. 2 months ago, Daniel had carried him through the ER doors, while Ethan's lips turned pale, and his breath came in ragged, panicked pulls, as if the world itself had tightened around his chest. After that night, the hospital bills had arrived like a second diagnosis. Daniel had counted numbers at his kitchen table until the coffee went cold. That was why he had applied. Not for ambition, not for pride, for time, for insurance, for the chance to stop living one inhaler refill away from disaster. And now this room, this bright, cold room, was telling him that survival still had a dress code. Marcus closed the folder again. "We'll be moving forward with other candidates," he said. "It should have been the end of it. A normal person might have begged. A desperate person might have argued. A man with less pride might have offered to start lower, to prove himself, to do anything. Daniel knew that instinct. He had lived inside it, but he also knew something else. There were things a man could lose that never came back. He rose. The chair legs whispered against the floor. All three of them looked up with the same polite surprise, as if he'd forgotten the script. "Thank you for your time," Daniel said, and he meant it in the same way you thanked a storm for passing without killing you. "I understand," Marcus blinked. Daniel was already walking to the door. His steps were measured, not hurried, not slow. The same pace he used when he didn't want anyone to see how badly his hands wanted to shake. In the hallway, the air felt different, less perfumed, more real. He kept moving, past glass walls and minimalist art that looked like money trying to be profound. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Inside, Daniel faced his reflection in the brushed metal doors. The suit made him look like a man playing a part. The face was his, hollowed by sleeplessness, marked by nights spent pacing beside a child's bed, eyes that had watched too many endings. When the elevator descended, he felt a familiar calm settle over him. In the military, there was a kind of peace that arrived when the decision had already been made. You could stop bargaining with fate. You could stop imagining alternate outcomes. You could simply move forward. The doors opened onto the lobby. North Glass Tower's ground floor was cathedral-wide and polished to a shine that made people feel small on purpose. Marble beneath his shoes, steel beams like ribs, glass walls holding in the wealth like air. Daniel walked across it in daylight. He had worked here nights for 3 years, wearing a security uniform, scanning badges, watching people enter the building with coffee and confidence, then leave with their lives intact. At night, he kept the building safe. In the day, he was invisible. He reached the revolving doors. Outside, the city's winter air pressed against the glass. He could already picture the bus ride back, the school pickup, Ethan's thin arms around his waist, the lie he would have to tell. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." Daniel placed his hand on the door and pushed. The revolving glass turned. He stepped forward, and behind him, the lobby erupted with the sound of heels striking marble like urgent punctuation. "Daniel Mercer!" The voice was sharp, controlled, and out of place among the morning hush. Daniel froze, not because he was afraid, because he recognized urgency when he heard it. He turned slowly. A woman in a dark suit was moving quickly across the lobby, her posture perfect even while she ran. People parted for her without being asked. The security guard straightened. A receptionist went still. Daniel saw the badge clipped to her jacket and the way the building itself seemed to make room. Claire Whitman, Chief Executive Officer. She was breathing hard, as if she had sprinted from somewhere high above the city to catch one man before he disappeared into the crowd. And the way she looked at Daniel was not pity, it was recognition, like she had finally found the missing piece of something that had been bothering her for a long time. "Daniel," she said again, softer now, stopping a few feet away. "Please, don't leave." Daniel's hand was still on the glass. The door had stopped turning. For a moment, the entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. And Daniel Mercer, who had survived war, survived grief, survived the slow humiliation of being overlooked, stood perfectly still because the hardest battles were never the loud ones. They were the moments when hope returned, and you had to decide whether to trust it. And then she told him why. Daniel Mercer learned to measure time differently after the war. Not in hours, but in intervals between alarms. Not in days, but in nights that passed without incident. At 9:47 p.m., he clipped his security badge onto his belt and stepped into North Glass Tower through the employee entrance, the one hidden behind glass and steel, away from the front doors where daylight workers came and went with their heads full of meetings. The night shift smelled different, less perfume, more metal, a trace of industrial cleaner that never quite faded. Daniel nodded once to the guard he was relieving, a young man with restless eyes and a phone already halfway out of his pocket. They exchanged no words. Night workers learned quickly that silence conserved energy. Daniel preferred it that way. He checked the logbook. Nothing unusual. Cameras functioning. Access points clear. The building exhaled softly through its vents, a mechanical breathing that never stopped. At 10:12 p.m., he began his first round. North Glass Tower after dark was a fortress emptied of ceremony. Conference rooms lay stripped of voices. Elevators slept between floors like animals conserving warmth. Offices that held power by day became rooms of shadows and reflections by night. Daniel walked them all. He moved with the steady economy of someone who had once been trained to notice everything without appearing to look at anything. Corners first, lines of sight, exit routes, habits that never left, even when the uniform changed. Somewhere above him, executives slept in homes paid for by decisions made inside these walls. Somewhere below, the city pulsed with noise. But here, in the quiet, Daniel was responsible for holding the line between order and whatever came next. He passed the lobby at midnight. The marble floor reflected his boots and the security lights overhead, stretching him into a longer, thinner version of himself. During the day, this space was full of voices and motion. At night, it felt like a chapel built to worship money. Daniel paused near the security desk and adjusted the camera feed on the central monitor. Everything looked as it should. He didn't linger. At 12:41 a.m., he reached the underground parking level. The air was colder there, heavier. Sound traveled differently underground. Footsteps echoed longer, made small noises feel important. Daniel's hand rested near the radio at his shoulder as he moved between concrete pillars, scanning license plates, checking shadows. That was when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, a soft stumble, a sharp intake of breath. Daniel turned. An older man stood near a black sedan, one hand braced against the hood, the other pressed to his chest. His face was pale beneath the fluorescent lights, eyes unfocused. "Sir," Daniel said calmly, already closing the distance, "can you hear me?" The man nodded once, too quickly. "I'm fine," he said, which was how Daniel knew he wasn't. Sweat beaded at the man's temples despite the cold. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Daniel recognized the signs immediately. Not from textbooks, but from nights spent watching soldiers push past their limits. "Sit," Daniel said, firm but controlled. "Please." The man wavered. Daniel guided him to the low concrete divider near the parking spaces and eased him down. He crouched in front of him, keeping his voice low. "Have you eaten today?" Daniel asked. The man shook his head. "Meetings," he said. "Long day." Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a wrapped piece of hard candy. He always carried one, for Ethan, originally. For emergencies, eventually. "Put this in your mouth," Daniel said. "Don't chew." The man hesitated, then obeyed. Daniel keyed his radio. "Medical assistance to parking level B2, he said. "Adult male, conscious, possible hypoglycemia." He stayed with the man, monitoring his breathing, keeping him talking. Within minutes, security and paramedics arrived. The crisis passed quietly, without spectacle. The man recovered enough to stand, shaken but stable. "Thank you," he said, gripping Daniel's forearm. "You noticed?" Daniel nodded. "That's my job." The man smiled weakly. "You saved me a lot of trouble tonight." Daniel didn't respond. He'd learned that gratitude often evaporated once people felt safe again. By 1:23 a.m., the parking level was empty once more. No report was written, no recognition logged. Daniel returned to his rounds. That was how it always worked. Quiet competence didn't travel far. It rarely climbed. At 3:08 a.m., his phone vibrated in his pocket. He didn't check it immediately. Personal phones stayed silent on duty unless something mattered. When the vibration came again, sharper this time, he stepped into a stairwell and answered. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was thin, threaded with sleep. "I can't breathe right." Daniel's chest tightened. "I'm here," he said instantly. "Use your inhaler. Slow breaths." "I'm listening." He stayed on the line while Ethan counted. In, out, again. "Is it bad?" Ethan asked. "No," Daniel said, because children believed the tone more than the words. "You're doing great." After a minute, Ethan's breathing eased. "I'm sorry I woke you," Ethan murmured. "You didn't," Daniel said. "I was already awake." That was true in ways Ethan couldn't understand. When the call ended, Daniel rested his forehead briefly against the cool concrete wall. Just a second, long enough to reset. This was why he worked nights, so he could be present when it mattered, so his son would never wake alone and afraid. At 4:57 a.m., Daniel returned to the lobby. The building was preparing for morning. Lights brightened incrementally. The silence thinned. Soon, the day shift would arrive, and Daniel would fade back into the edges where he belonged. He stood near the security desk, watching the city through the glass walls as dawn crept up the sides of buildings. Somewhere above him, decisions were being made about hiring, about image, about who fit and who didn't. Daniel adjusted his jacket and prepared to clock out. He didn't know yet that the quiet choice he had made in a parking garage 2 months earlier had already been noticed by the one person who could change everything. He only knew that when the sun rose, he would walk his son to school, make breakfast, and keep moving forward, because standing still had never kept anyone safe for long. And far above the lobby, someone was finally reviewing the footage. There was no place in North Glass Tower for what Daniel Mercer carried with him. No checkbox for war, no column for nights without sleep. No metric for the kind of attention that noticed a man collapsing before anyone else did. If it wasn't written down, it didn't exist. And Daniel had learned, slowly, painfully, that most of his life fell into that category. The morning after the parking garage incident, Daniel clocked out at 6:02 a.m. and walked home under a sky the color of wet steel. He stopped at the corner store, bought a carton of milk and a loaf of bread, paid in exact change. The clerk barely looked up. By 6:41, Ethan was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his inhaler laid neatly beside his bowl of cereal. "You working late again tonight?" Ethan asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Same as always." Ethan nodded, accepting it with the quiet resignation of a child who had learned not to ask for things that disrupted fragile systems. Daniel hated that look more than any insult. They walked to school together. Daniel waited until Ethan disappeared through the doors before turning back toward the bus stop. He checked his phone on the ride home. No messages, no missed calls, no acknowledgement from North Glass, no follow-up about the man he'd helped. He hadn't expected one. That was the part that surprised him later. Not the rejection, but how completely predictable it felt. 2 weeks passed, then 4. The memory of the incident faded into the background of Daniel's life, stored with other moments that had mattered only briefly before dissolving into routine. He continued his night patrols. He checked badges, he watched cameras, he answered Ethan's calls when breathing became difficult. The building remained pristine, the systems ran smoothly, and Daniel stayed exactly where he was until the flyer appeared. It was taped crookedly to the bulletin board near the staff elevators, half hidden behind a laminated notice about updated fire drill procedures. The paper was thick, the font clean and confident. Operations Coordinator. Internal applicants encouraged. Daniel read it once, then again. The position description was longer than most postings, detailed to the point of exhaustion. Responsibilities included interdepartmental coordination, incident response, logistics support, vendor communication, familiar words. Words that lived close to things he'd done before, only under different names, in different places, with consequences that didn't end in performance reviews. Daytime hours, full benefits, health insurance. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, small and unwelcome. Hope. He stood there longer than he should have, the noise of the building passing around him, as if he were standing in the middle of a river. Employees brushed past with coffee cups and conversations that didn't include him. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the posting. That night, after Ethan fell asleep with a book open on his chest, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and opened his old laptop. The screen flickered before settling. He hadn't updated his resume in years. He stared at the blank document for a long time. What did you write when your most valuable experience didn't translate cleanly? Manage convoy routes through hostile territory didn't sound right. Maintain perimeter security during active threat scenarios raised questions he didn't want to answer. Kept people alive felt too honest. So he stripped it down. Security officer, North Glass Tower, incident response, access control, overnight operations. Before that, logistics specialist, United States Army team coordination, emergency planning, field operations. He didn't embellish. He didn't apologize. He wrote the cover letter slowly, carefully, choosing words that could survive scrutiny. He emphasized reliability, situational awareness, calm under pressure. He did not mention the war unless it was unavoidable. He did not mention Ethan at all. When he finished, he read it twice, then once more out loud. It sounded small, but it was true. Daniel clicked submit before doubt could reorganize itself into reason. The confirmation email arrived instantly. Automated, impersonal. He closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, listening to his son breathe in the next room. 3 days later, the interview invitation arrived. Daniel read the subject line 5 times. He borrowed the suit from his neighbor, an older man named Carl, who'd once worked sales before arthritis ended that chapter of his life. Carl didn't ask questions. He just pressed the suit into Daniel's hands and said, "Wear it like you belong there." Daniel ironed it that night until the fabric steamed and the creases held. The interview itself unfolded exactly the way the war had taught him things sometimes did, slowly at first, then all at once. He answered questions cleanly, directly. He didn't overreach. He didn't undersell. He watched their faces change when he said he hadn't attended college. He felt the shift when he admitted he worked security. He recognized the look. Assessment, recalculation, dismissal. By the time Marcus closed the folder, Daniel already knew. Walking out of the room hurt less than sitting there pretending. After the lobby confrontation with Claire Whitman, Daniel returned home in a state that felt dangerously close to vertigo. The ground had shifted beneath him without warning. Possibilities, real ones, had cracked open where he had learned to seal them shut. But even then, a part of him stayed cautious. He'd seen promises before. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Daniel checked his email. Nothing. The next morning, nothing. 2 days passed. Then an internal memo circulated through North Glass. It was brief, carefully worded. It announced a temporary pause in the operations coordinator hiring process pending procedural review. No names were mentioned, but something changed. Supervisors started watching differently. Conversations stopped when Daniel entered rooms. Paige from HR passed him in the hallway one afternoon and didn't meet his eyes. The system was adjusting itself, slowly, defensively, like an organism responding to injury. Daniel felt the pressure without understanding its shape. On Friday night, while reviewing camera feeds in the security office, Daniel noticed a notification flag on one of the archived recordings. The timestamp matched the night in the parking garage. The footage had been accessed, twice. Once by security management, once by an executive account. Daniel stared at the screen. Someone had gone looking. He leaned back in his chair, the hum of monitors filling the room. For the first time since the interview, something unfamiliar edged out his skepticism. Not optimism. Awareness. The war had taught him that when command started reviewing old footage, something had already gone wrong, or was about to. Daniel logged out, finished his shift, and stepped into the morning air with a new weight on his shoulders. He didn't know yet what Claire Whitman intended to do. He only knew that a moment he thought had vanished into nothing had been pulled back into the light. And systems, once disturbed, rarely returned to their original shape. By the time the doors of North Glass Tower opened again, the reckoning was already moving. Claire Whitman had learned long ago that power did not announce itself. It hid in calendars, in meeting agendas, in decisions labeled procedural. At 6:15 a.m., while most of North Glass Tower still slept behind locked offices and dark glass, Claire stood alone in her private conference room on the 32nd floor, watching a paused video on a wall-sized screen. The image showed a parking garage, fluorescent lights, concrete pillars. A man in a security uniform crouched in front of someone just out of frame. Claire folded her arms. She remembered the night clearly, not because it had made headlines, but because it had irritated her. Margaret Sutherland, senior partner, Defense Logistics, $50 million contract, had called her the next morning. "One of your guards noticed before anyone else," Margaret had said. "He didn't panic, he didn't posture, he just handled it." Claire had made a mental note. She always did. But notes, like intentions, had a way of being buried under urgency. Now the footage played again. She watched Daniel Mercer approach, not rushing, not hesitating. She watched him lower himself to eye level, saw the way his shoulders angled, not threatening, not submissive, controlled, protective. Claire paused the video and leaned closer. This was not instinct. This was training. She rewound 10 seconds and played it again, slower this time. Daniel's hand movements were economical. His voice, barely audible on the feed, steady. Claire exhaled through her nose. She had seen this posture before, not in corporate offices. In briefings with men who'd stood too close to maps and spoke about lives as coordinates. Her phone buzzed, an INTAS eternal alert. Operations coordinator. Interview recording flagged. Claire tapped it open. The feed switched. Glass conference room, 15th floor, 3 interviewers, 1 candidate, Daniel Mercer. Claire didn't sit down. She watched standing, hands clasped behind her back, as Marcus Harlan spoke in the smooth cadence of a man who believed himself reasonable. She watched the questions shift. She watched the posture changes, and she felt something colder than anger settle into her chest. Not betrayal, recognition. She recognized the pattern because she had once been part of it. Years ago, before North Glass became a name people respected, Claire had sat on panels like this one. She had nodded along when someone said culture fit instead of comfort. She had let decisions slide because they were efficient. That was the lie organizations told themselves. Efficiency was neutral. Claire watched Daniel stand. She watched him choose dignity. And when the video ended, she did not move for a long time. She thought about the war, not the battles, but the aftermath. The men who returned trained to make decisions under pressure, only to be told later that their experience didn't translate. She thought about the programs North Glass advertised during Veterans Day campaigns, the press releases, the polished language. Then she thought about the quiet man in the borrowed suit who had walked out without asking for anything. Claire pressed a button on the console. "Pull Marcus Harlan's hiring metrics for the past 18 months, she said to the room's AI interface. Flag candidates with non-traditional backgrounds, cross-reference rejection reasons. The screen flickered. Numbers began to populate. Claire's jaw tightened. Patterns always existed. The question was who bothered to look. At 8:02 a.m., Claire stepped into the elevator. She did not bring an assistant. She did not schedule a meeting. She watched the floor numbers descend. By the time the doors opened onto the lobby, the building had begun to wake. Employees moved through the space with coffee and conversation. The front desk staff smiled on cue. Security stood in their assigned places. Daniel Mercer was not there. Claire scanned the space anyway, then turned sharply toward the security desk. "Where's Mercer?" she asked. The guard straightened. "Clocked out, ma'am. Night shift." Claire nodded once. "Thank you." She turned on her heel and headed back toward the elevators. She had missed him. That did not sit well. By noon, the internal pause memo had circulated. Claire approved the language herself. Neutral, non-accusatory, safe. The reactions, however, were not. Marcus Harlan sent 3 emails before lunch requesting clarification. Page submitted a calendar request for a process alignment discussion. Trent Wallace canceled a site visit and appeared unannounced outside Claire's office. Claire did not see him. Instead, she watched more footage. She watched Daniel Mercer doing his job. Badge checks, calm redirection, de-escalation. She watched him intervene when a delivery driver grew aggressive, his voice low, posture open. She watched him answer a late-night call from his phone, turn slightly away from the cameras, and rest his head briefly against a wall before returning to duty. That moment, small, human, held her attention longer than anything else. At 4:47 p.m., Claire made her decision. It was not impulsive. It was overdue. She typed a single message. "Bring the interview panel to the lobby, immediately. No explanation, no agenda." She stood, took her blazer from the back of the chair, and walked toward the elevator. When she reached the lobby again, the revolving doors turned quietly as people came and went. Claire stood near the security desk and waited. She did not have to wait long. Daniel Mercer appeared through the glass, moving with the tired grace of a man who had slept too little and carried too much. He walked across the lobby in daylight, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Claire saw the moment he noticed her, the way his stride faltered, just slightly, the way he recalibrated. She stepped forward. "Daniel Mercer," she called, and when he turned, she saw not confusion, but readiness. That confirmed everything. "Please," she said, lowering her voice as she approached him. "Don't leave yet." He hesitated. Claire could see the calculation behind his eyes. The cost of hope weighed against the safety of walking away. She stopped a respectful distance from him. She did not reach out. "I watched your interview," she said simply. Daniel's jaw tightened. "And I watched what you did 2 months ago in the parking garage," she continued. "I should have spoken to you then." The building seemed to lean inward. Claire gestured toward a quieter corner of the lobby. "I'm not offering you a favor," she said. "I'm correcting a failure." Daniel studied her face. "What kind?" he asked. Claire held his gaze. "The kind that only matters if you stay." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. Then slowly, he stepped away from the door. The glass stopped turning behind him. And far above them, elevators began carrying people downward. summoned to answer questions they had never expected to face. By the time the panel arrived, the system would no longer be able to pretend it hadn't seen him. The elevator doors opened with a sound that was too soft for what was about to happen. Marcus Harlan stepped out first. He adjusted his tie automatically, the way men did when they needed armor but only had fabric. Behind him came Paige, clutching a tablet to her chest, and Trent Wallace, his expression tight with the irritation of someone pulled away from something he considered more important. They froze when they saw Claire Whitman standing in the lobby. They froze again when they noticed who was standing beside her. Daniel Mercer did not move. He stood with his hands relaxed at his sides, shoulders level, feet planted just wide enough to be stable. It was not defiance. It was readiness. The posture of a man who had learned that when pressure came, balance mattered more than speed. Marcus recovered first. "Claire," he said, forcing a smile into place. "Is there an issue?" Claire did not return the smile. "There is," she said calmly, "and we're going to address it now." People were beginning to notice. A pair of employees slowed as they passed the lobby. The receptionist pretended to organize papers she didn't need. The security guard straightened, eyes flicking between the faces in front of him. Claire gestured toward an open space near the center of the lobby. No conference room, no glass walls to soften the moment. "Explain," she said to Marcus, "why Daniel Mercer was rejected this morning." Marcus glanced at Daniel, then back to Claire. "The decision followed our standard evaluation process." "What standards?" Claire asked. Marcus hesitated. "Just long enough." "He lacks a college degree," Marcus said, "and he doesn't have formal administrative training." Claire tilted her head slightly. "Does the job description require a degree?" "No," Marcus admitted, "but it's preferred." "Preferred by whom?" Marcus's lips pressed together. "By the team." Claire nodded once, as if noting something for later. "And his experience?" "He has security experience," Trent cut in. "That's not the same as operations coordination." Claire turned to him. "Define the difference." Trent shifted his weight. "The coordinator role requires judgment, communication, crisis handling." "Stop," Claire said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. She turned to Daniel. "Mr. Mercer, how many people were under your supervision during your last deployment?" Daniel did not raise his voice. 23. "And your responsibility?" "Route planning, threat assessment, personnel safety." Claire nodded and looked back at Trent. "Continue." Trent said nothing. Claire turned back to Marcus. "You asked him where he went to college." "Yes." "Did you ask how he handled emergencies?" "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "And did he answer?" "He did." "Did his answers indicate incompetence?" Marcus swallowed. "No." Claire let the silence stretch. It grew uncomfortable, heavy, honest. "Then explain," she said, "why the tone of the interview changed after he disclosed his current position." Paige inhaled sharply. "We weren't judging—" Claire raised a hand, cutting her off without looking at her. "You were." The word landed cleanly. "You evaluated image," Claire continued, "not ability. You measured comfort, not competence." Marcus stiffened. "We have to consider how candidates reflect the company." "And what," Claire asked quietly, "does Daniel Mercer reflect?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Daniel felt something unfamiliar twist inside him. Not satisfaction, not anger, but exposure. His life, reduced to a moment of silence in a lobby. "I didn't ask to be here," Daniel said, his voice steady. "If this is about charity—" "It's not," Claire said immediately. She turned to face him fully. "This is about accountability," she said. "I watched you walk out of that room without asking for anything you hadn't earned. That matters." She faced the panel again. "You rejected a qualified candidate based on assumptions," Claire said. "That is a failure of process. And process failures are leadership failures." Trent shifted uncomfortably. "What are you saying?" Claire's eyes did not leave his. "I'm saying the decision is overturned." Marcus stiffened. "Claire, with respect—" "No," she said. "This is not a discussion." She turned back to Daniel. "I'm not offering you the position outright," Claire said. "Not because you don't deserve it, but because it wouldn't fix the problem. It would hide it." Daniel frowned slightly. "Then what are you offering?" "A fair path," Claire said. "A 2-month transition program. Paid. Benefits effective immediately. Training with our operations team. At the end of it, you'll be evaluated on performance alone." The lobby was silent now. Daniel heard his own heartbeat. "And if I fail?" he asked. "Then you fail honestly," Claire said. Not because someone decided you didn't belong before you began. Daniel considered that. He thought of Ethan's inhaler, the hospital bills folded on the kitchen counter, the night spent listening to a child breathe. He also thought of the door he had already walked through once today. I don't want special treatment, Daniel said. Claire met his eyes. Neither do I. She extended her hand, not as a gesture of power, but of agreement. This only works, she said, if you choose to stay. Daniel looked at her hand, then at the panel, then at the lobby he had protected for years without being seen. He shook her hand. I'll stay, he said. Marcus's face tightened. Paige stared at the floor. Trent exhaled slowly. Claire nodded once. Good. She turned to the panel. You're dismissed. They left without another word. As the elevators carried them away, the lobby seemed to breathe again. Daniel released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Claire looked at him. Report to HR Monday morning, she said. We'll take it from there. Daniel nodded. As he turned toward the doors again, this time not to leave, but to move forward, he felt the strange, disorienting sensation of ground shifting beneath old rules. Outside, the city continued as it always had. Inside North Glass Tower, something irreversible had begun. And Daniel Mercer would soon learn that being given a chance was far more dangerous than being denied one. Daniel Mercer learned very quickly that staying came with a price. It was not written into any contract. It did not appear in emails or onboarding documents, but it showed itself everywhere. On Monday morning, Daniel arrived at North Glass Tower at 8:12 a.m., 15 minutes early out of habit. The borrowed suit felt heavier in daylight, as if it had absorbed the weight of the weekend, of Ethan's cautious excitement, of the quiet arithmetic Daniel had done in his head while staring at the kitchen ceiling at night. He stood in the lobby for a moment, adjusting his cuffs. People looked at him differently now. Some recognized him from the scene on Friday, the CEO, the raised voices, the quiet dismissal. Others saw only what they always had, a man who didn't quite match the architecture around him. The HR office sat on the third floor, tucked behind frosted glass and neutral signage. Inside, a woman named Melissa greeted him with professional politeness and nothing more. Mr. Mercer, she said, handing him a clipboard, these are your intake forms. She did not smile. She did not frown. She treated him the way systems treated exceptions, with caution. Daniel filled out the paperwork carefully. Emergency contact, Ethan Mercer, insurance enrollment, immediate. He paused when he reached the section labeled previous occupation, security officer, former Army logistics specialist. The words looked fragile on paper. When he finished, Melissa reviewed the forms, nodded once, and gestured toward the hallway. Your training begins tomorrow, she said. You'll be assigned to the Operations Integration Program. Daniel exhaled. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, some people may not understand why you're here. Daniel met her eyes. I understand. The training room was on the 10th floor. Glass walls, long table, whiteboard already marked with neat bullet points. 4 other trainees sat scattered along the table, laptops open, coffee cups steaming. They looked up as Daniel entered. 2 men, 2 women, all younger than him, all dressed in the unspoken uniform of early confidence. Pressed shirts, polished shoes, faces that had not yet learned what disappointment settled into. A woman in her 40s stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, posture relaxed but alert. I'm Clara Hayes, she said. I run customer operations. I don't care where you came from. I care what you do in this room. Daniel liked her immediately. The first week focused on systems, process maps, communication flows, how requests moved through the building like blood through arteries. Clara spoke quickly, expecting everyone to keep up. Daniel took notes by hand. He had learned long ago that writing things down anchored them. Laptops failed, memory failed, paper endured. During a scenario exercise, one of the trainees froze. What do we do if facilities doesn't respond? The man asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Daniel spoke without raising his hand. You escalate laterally first. Find the person who needs the outcome, not the department. Clara's eyebrow lifted. Explain. You don't argue with the system, Daniel said. You move around it. The room went quiet. Clara nodded slowly. Good. The others looked at him differently after that, not warmly, but attentively. At night, Daniel still worked security. The transition was immediate, not gradual. His supervisor had told him there was no need for a notice period, North Glass wanted him focused on the new role, so Daniel slept in fragments. He woke at 2:14 a.m. to Ethan coughing. He timed inhaler doses, counted breaths, waited until the fear drained from his son's eyes before allowing it to touch his own. He arrived at training tired but upright. That was the cost. By the third week, the resistance became more visible. Emails copied too many people, meetings scheduled without him, decisions made in rooms he hadn't been invited into. Once, Daniel walked into the break room to find two employees fall silent mid-sentence. He did not confront them. He had learned that silence could be more revealing than answers. Instead, he focused on the work. He learned North Glass's software systems methodically, asking questions only when necessary. He stayed late to practice workflows. He volunteered for scenario drills others avoided. Clara noticed. "So," she said one afternoon as they reviewed a simulated crisis response, "you've done this before." Daniel nodded. "Different stakes." She studied him. "You don't flinch." "I do," Daniel said. "I just don't let it steer." Clara smiled faintly. "That'll serve you." At home, Ethan noticed the changes before Daniel did. "You look tired happy," Ethan said one night, curled on the couch with a blanket. Daniel laughed softly. "Is that a thing?" "It is when you don't look scared anymore," Ethan said. Daniel didn't trust that yet. He trusted routines. He trusted work. Trusting outcomes felt dangerous. On Friday afternoon, Daniel was called into a small conference room. Claire Whitman was waiting. No assistants, no devices, just her, seated at the round table. "Sit," she said. Daniel did. "You're being tested," Claire said without preamble. Daniel nodded. "I figured. Not officially," she continued. "Unofficially, by people who believe the system should have protected them from being questioned." "And you?" Daniel asked. Claire held his gaze. "I'm watching how you carry it." She leaned back slightly. "You don't have to endure hostility to prove worth," she said, "but you do have to survive it." Daniel absorbed that. "I didn't stay to make friends," he said. Claire's mouth curved. "Good. You stayed to change gravity." She stood. "This won't get easier," she said, "but it will get clearer." Daniel rose as well. As Claire left the room, Daniel felt the weight of her words settle into him, not as warning, but as confirmation. Staying had a cost, but leaving had already cost him years. That evening, Daniel walked out of North Glass Tower at sunset instead of dawn. The city looked different in that light, less hostile, more uncertain. He texted Ethan, "On my way." Then, after a moment, added another line, "Proud of you." He didn't know yet whether this path would hold. He only knew he was no longer invisible, and that visibility, once granted, could never be taken lightly. Because the closer Daniel came to belonging, the more dangerous the final evaluation would become. The first real test did not come as a crisis. It came as a meeting. Daniel Mercer learned that day that systems rarely broke loudly. They revealed themselves in rooms with glass walls, polite agendas, and chairs arranged to suggest equality where none truly existed. The meeting invite arrived at 7:03 a.m. Operations Alignment Review. Mandatory attendance, no context, no objectives, just a room number and a time. Daniel read it twice before closing his phone. He stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the narrow strip of sky visible between apartment buildings, while Ethan finished his breakfast behind him. "Big day?" Ethan asked. Spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Maybe," Daniel said, "but they're all big days now." Ethan considered that, then nodded solemnly, as if Daniel had just said something important. By 9 a.m., Daniel was seated in conference room 14B. The room smelled faintly of marker ink and recycled air. A dozen people filtered in, department leads, mid-level managers, faces Daniel recognized from hallways and email signatures. Marcus Harlan entered last. He did not look at Daniel. The meeting began the way all meetings did, with slides and language that pretended to be neutral. Marcus spoke about workflow efficiencies. Someone else mentioned process cohesion. Another voice raised concerns about operational consistency. Then the word appeared. Risk. Marcus cleared his throat. "There's concern," he said carefully, "that fast-tracking certain candidates may introduce instability into established teams." Daniel felt the temperature in the room shift. Clara Hayes sat across from him, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Which candidates?" she asked. Marcus adjusted his glasses. "We don't need to name names." Daniel did not look down. He had learned in other rooms, long ago, that looking down invited pressure. "Let's," Clara said. The silence that followed was immediate and sharp. Marcus hesitated, then exhaled. "Daniel Mercer." All eyes turned. Daniel waited. Marcus continued, "There's concern that his background, while admirable, may not align with the expectations of certain stakeholders." Daniel finally spoke. "Define expectation." Marcus blinked, caught off rhythm. "Presentation," Marcus said. "Professional instincts, cultural fluency." Daniel nodded once. "And which of those have I failed to demonstrate?" No one answered. Clara leaned forward. "He's completed every scenario faster than baseline," she said, "with fewer escalations. His documentation is clean. His decision-making is consistent." "That's not in question," Marcus replied quickly. "Then what is?" Clara asked. The room grew quiet again, uncomfortable in a way that suggested truth was approaching. Marcus chose his words carefully. "Some teams feel watched." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Watched?" Marcus glanced around. "When exceptions are made, it can feel like standards are shifting." Daniel let that settle. Then he said calmly, "Standards that can't survive observation aren't standards. They're habits." Someone inhaled sharply. Someone else looked down at their notes. Marcus's jaw tightened. "This isn't a debate." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's an evaluation." He looked around the table. "You're worried I don't belong," he said, not accusing, not defensive. "What you're actually worried about is that if I do, the room changes." Clara smiled faintly. Marcus stood. "We'll take these concerns offline." Daniel did not push. The meeting ended without resolution, which was its own answer. By noon, the rumors had spread. Daniel heard them in fragments, in the pause before someone spoke, in the way emails stopped copying him, in the way doors closed a little more quickly. Being seen had shifted the balance. That afternoon, Daniel was called into another room, smaller, quieter. Claire Whitman was there. She did not offer him a seat this time. She waited until he sat on his own. "They're pushing back," she said. Daniel nodded. "I know." "Are you surprised?" "No." "Good," Claire said, "because this is where most people retreat." She leaned forward slightly. "You won't be removed quietly. If they move, it'll be procedural, clean, painless." Daniel considered that. "In the military," he said, "the most dangerous orders were the calm ones." Claire's eyes held his. "Exactly." She slid a folder across the table. "Final evaluation," she said. 2 weeks from now. Live operations, no training wheels." Daniel opened the folder. "Real scenarios, real consequences. You pass," Claire continued, "and the role is yours. Publicly. Permanently. And if I don't?" "Then the system wins," Claire said, "and nothing changes." Daniel closed the folder. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, but gravity. "I won't make this easier for you," Claire added. "I won't shield you." Daniel stood. "I didn't come here to be shielded." Claire nodded once. "Good." That evening, Daniel walked Ethan home from school, under a sky already fading toward dusk. "Did you win?" Ethan asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not yet." Ethan looked up at him. "Did you quit?" Daniel stopped walking. He knelt, meeting his son's eyes. "No," he said. "I stayed." Ethan smiled, small and sure. "Then you're winning." Daniel stood again, hand resting briefly on Ethan's shoulder as they continued home. The city moved around them, indifferent as ever. But somewhere inside North Glass Tower, the balance had shifted too far to be reset. The system had been forced to look at itself, and in 2 weeks' time, it would decide whether it could survive the reflection. Because the closer the final evaluation drew, the more dangerous standing his ground would become. The final evaluation did not begin with an announcement. It began with a failure. At 8:36 a.m. on a Tuesday that looked like every other Tuesday, the visitor management system on the east side of North Glass Tower went dark. No alerts, no alarms, just a quiet cascade of errors that rippled across access points like a held breath finally released. Daniel Mercer was already at his desk. He noticed the pause before anyone else noticed the absence. A delivery driver stood at the desk, paperwork in hand, waiting longer than usual. A security camera feed blinked, then froze. The check-in tablet restarted itself and stalled at the loading screen. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not call for help. He stood. "Give me a moment," he told the driver, calm enough to sound like reassurance. He stepped sideways, not away, never away, and pulled up the back-end console. Permissions were intact, hardware responsive, network latency normal. This was not an accident. Daniel felt it in his bones the way he once felt incoming fire before it arrived. He opened the escalation map and traced the failure upstream. One node had been rerouted, cleanly, intentionally, forcing a bottleneck that would look like incompetence if not resolved quickly. Around him, the lobby filled. Executives arrived early for an off-site briefing. A visiting delegation from a logistics partner waited, irritation sharpening their posture. The air thickened with the sound of expectation. Daniel checked the time. 8 minutes. He routed manually, bypassing the compromised node, creating a temporary bridge that restored function without tripping alarms. The system flickered, then stabilized. Access resumed. The driver checked in. The delegation moved forward. Conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. Daniel exhaled once, quietly. Clara Hayes appeared beside him. "You saw that fast," she said. Daniel nodded. "It wanted to be missed." Clara's eyes narrowed. "You think someone did this on purpose?" "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that tests rarely announce themselves." The rest of the morning unfolded with deliberate precision. A scheduling conflict that should not have existed. A facilities delay blamed on poor communication. A protocol question posed in a tone that suggested failure was expected. Daniel handled each without comment. He documented everything. At noon, Claire Whitman watched from the executive floor. She had insisted on no observers, no commentary, no intervention. This was not a performance. It was a trial. Daniel did not know she was watching. That was the point. At 1:14 p.m., the real test arrived. A fire alarm triggered on level 19, not a drill. The system flagged smoke near a server room. False positives happened, but rarely in that configuration. Daniel was already moving. He rerouted foot traffic away from the affected zone, coordinated with facilities and security simultaneously, and pulled building schematics from memory. He issued instructions that did not sound like orders, but were followed anyway. He arrived at level 19 to find haze, but no fire, an overheating unit, a failing sensor, contained, resolved. As he escorted the last employee back toward the elevators, Daniel's phone vibrated. "Ethan." Daniel stepped aside. "Dad?" Ethan's voice was tight. "I can't get a full breath." Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. "I'm here," he said. "Sit down. Inhale. Slow." He stayed with his son, voice steady, counting breaths while his other hand typed instructions into the system, delegating without panic, trusting the structure he had built in the last hours. By the time Ethan's breathing eased, the crisis at North Glass had already ended. Daniel stood alone in the stairwell afterward, the echo of alarms fading from memory, and allowed himself exactly one long breath. That evening, Clara stopped by his desk. "They threw everything at you," she said. "You didn't flinch." Daniel looked at the quiet lobby. "I flinched," he said. "I just didn't stop." At 6:02 p.m., Claire Whitman called him upstairs. No folder this time, no table between them. "You passed," she said. Daniel nodded, absorbing the words slowly, like pressure equalizing. "Not because you were perfect," Claire continued, "but because when things failed, you didn't." She extended her hand. Daniel shook it. Outside, the sun was setting when he left the building, gold bleeding into steel and glass. He texted Ethan, "How's your breathing?" The reply came seconds later. "Better. I did what you said." Daniel smiled. He did not feel victorious. He felt grounded, and that, he knew, would matter more when the consequences arrived. Because passing the trial did not mean the story was over. It meant it would finally be told. Belonging did not arrive with applause. It came quietly, the way weather changed, felt before it was announced. Daniel Mercer's first morning as operations coordinator began at 7:38 a.m., not because he needed to be early, but because his body had not yet learned a new rhythm. He stood in front of the mirror in the narrow bathroom of their apartment, knotting a tie he had bought with his first paycheck from the program. Gray, simple, his own. Ethan watched from the doorway, toothbrush paused midair. "You look like you're going somewhere important," Ethan said. Daniel smiled faintly. "I am." At North Glass Tower, the lobby recognized him before the people did. The security turnstiles opened without hesitation. The front desk nodded as he passed. His badge no longer carried the temporary stripe that marked him as provisional. It was a small change, but Daniel felt it like a shift in gravity. David, the senior front desk coordinator, met him near the elevators, late 40s, calm eyes. The kind of man who had learned how to stay useful without becoming invisible. Heard about the evaluation, David said as they rode up. You held steady. Daniel shrugged. That's the job. David studied him for a moment. That's not how most people see it. They worked side by side through the morning. Daniel learned the cadence of the desk, the surge at 9, the lull before lunch, the subtle differences between visitors who needed directions and those who needed reassurance. He watched how David read posture, tone, hesitation. It was familiar work, even here, framed by glass and policy instead of uniforms and radio codes. A junior executive arrived late, agitated about a missed meeting. Daniel listened without interruption, acknowledged the frustration, rerouted the schedule, and walked the executive personally to the correct floor. No escalation, no performance. When the executive left, David nodded once. Approval, not praise. At lunch, Daniel sat alone at a small table near the windows of the employee cafeteria. He ate slowly, checking his phone. A message from Ethan waited. Did you do good today? Daniel typed back. I did my job. Ethan responded almost immediately. That means yes. Daniel smiled. Across the room, a few people glanced his way. Conversations softened, then resumed. The tension had not disappeared. It had simply shifted. Some watched him with curiosity, others with calculation. Marcus Harlan passed through the cafeteria without stopping. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Marcus looked away first. In the afternoon, Claire Whitman walked through the lobby with 2 board members. She did not stop at the desk. She did not introduce Daniel. She simply met his eyes as she passed and gave a small nod. It was not approval. It was acknowledgement. That mattered more. By 5:30 p.m., Daniel felt the day settle into his bones. Not exhaustion, but weight. The good kind. The kind that came from work that asked something of you and gave something back. He clocked out, took the elevator down, and stepped into the evening air. The city moved around him, indifferent and alive. Daniel walked toward the bus stop, tie loosened, shoulders finally dropping an inch. He thought about the meeting rooms that no longer felt hostile, only cautious. He thought about the systems he now helped guide instead of endure. Belonging, he realized, was not permission. It was persistence. At home, Ethan was sprawled on the living room floor, homework half finished. How was it? Ethan asked. Daniel sat beside him. Busy. Ethan nodded, satisfied. That's good. Later, after Ethan fell asleep, Daniel stood by the window and looked out at the city lights. He did not feel triumphant. He felt responsible, because belonging was fragile, because when someone like him entered a room that had never made space, the room either changed or pushed back. Daniel knew which one was coming next. He turned off the light and went to bed. Tomorrow would test whether North Glass Tower had truly learned anything, and whether the space he'd carved out could hold. Because the final chapter would not be about earning his place, but about what that place demanded in return. The morning Daniel Mercer realized the building had changed, nothing remarkable happened. No alarms, no raised voices, no glass walls shattered by truth. The lobby simply worked. Visitors moved through North Glass Tower with unthinking ease. Schedules held. Systems spoke to one another without friction, the kind of order people only noticed when it failed. Daniel stood behind the operations desk, reviewing a routine access report, when a woman approached hesitantly. She wore a visitor badge clipped too high on her coat, fingers worrying the strap of her bag. I'm sorry, she said. I think I'm early. Daniel looked up, smiled gently. You are, but you're not lost. He checked the schedule, offered her a seat, and signaled facilities for coffee. She exhaled in relief, shoulders softening. Thank you, she said. It's intimidating in here. Daniel nodded once. It doesn't have to be. When she walked away minutes later, steadier than when she'd arrived, Daniel returned to his screen. That was the work. At 10 a.m., Claire Whitman convened an all-hands meeting, not in the executive suite, in the lobby. Employees gathered in clusters, confused but attentive. Daniel stood near the desk, not front and center, not hidden, exactly where he was meant to be. Claire stepped forward. For years, she said, we've measured success by credentials, polish, and proximity to power. We told ourselves that merit would surface on its own. She paused, letting the building listen. It doesn't. A murmur rippled through the crowd. We recently reviewed our hiring and advancement processes, Claire continued. What we found was not malice. It was comfort, habit, bias disguised as efficiency. She gestured, not dramatically, toward Daniel. Daniel Mercer did not break our system, she said. He revealed it. Silence. Then something quieter than applause. Attention. We are launching a permanent transition pathway for veterans and non-traditional candidates, Claire said. Training, evaluation, and advancement based on performance alone. No exceptions, no shortcuts. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle. Not pride, but gravity. This would outlast him. After the meeting dispersed, Clara Hayes approached Daniel. They're calling it the Mercer Path, she said, almost apologetically. Daniel shook his head. It doesn't need my name. Clara smiled. Too late. At lunch, Daniel ate with colleagues who no longer watched him like a question mark. Conversation moved easily, about work, about traffic, about nothing important. That, he realized, was important. Marcus Harlan passed by their table. He stopped. Daniel, Marcus said carefully, you handled yourself well. Daniel met his eyes. So did the system, eventually. Marcus nodded once and moved on. That evening, Daniel walked home with Ethan beneath a sky streaked orange and gray. Did you win today? Ethan asked. Daniel thought about the lobby, the meeting, the way the building breathed differently now. No, he said, but I stayed. Ethan smiled, satisfied. That's better. At home, Daniel helped with homework, timed inhaler doses, tucked Ethan into bed. Ordinary things. Sacred things. Later, alone by the window, Daniel looked out at the city. He did not feel rescued. He did not feel elevated. He felt placed. Degrees could open doors. Titles could command rooms. But character decided who could be trusted once inside. Daniel Mercer had walked out of North Glass Tower once with his dignity intact and nothing else. He had returned not because someone ran after him, but because the system learned, at last, how to see. And in that seeing, it had finally made room, not for him alone, but for everyone who would come after. This was where he belonged.